6:23 a.m. The Sea of Japan. First light. A thin gray line pressing up from the eastern horizon, turning the black water to dark steel. Somewhere beneath the surface, a Virginia-class submarine ran at depth and said nothing. Somewhere above the clouds, a constellation of U.S. military satellites tracked every square meter of the Korean peninsula in real time. Somewhere in a hardened bunker complex carved into the mountains of Chagang province, a countdown was already running. North Korea had been planning this moment for 3 years. The operation was called, in the internal documents of the Korean People's Army Strategic Rocket Forces, Plan Cholima, named for the mythical winged horse of Korean legend, a creature said to travel 10,000 aura in a single day. The plan was audacious in its scope and meticulous in its execution. 24 Hwasong-18 solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles. Not a demonstration, not a test. A simultaneous salvo targeting the 4 most critical military and logistics nodes supporting U.S. forces in Japan. Yokota Air Base in western Tokyo. Misawa Air Base in Aomori Prefecture. Kadena Air Base on Okinawa and the port facilities of Sasebo Naval Base. Strike those 4 targets simultaneously. Overwhelm, destroy, and paralyze the forward-deployed American military presence in the Pacific. And the balance of power in Northeast Asia would shift overnight. Pyongyang's calculation was clinical. 24 missiles, 8 aimed at each of 3 priority targets, with Kadena receiving a final, concentrated 8-missile salvo. No conventional missile defense system on Earth, the Korean People's Army generals believed, could intercept 24 simultaneous ballistic missile trajectories, arriving from multiple azimuths and at varying re-entry velocities. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Systems, the THAAD batteries deployed in Japan and South Korea, could handle a certain volume of incoming fire, but 24 simultaneous launches, spread across 4 separate targets, arriving within seconds of each other. The generals in Pyongyang had run the numbers. They were confident. They had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. First mistake: the launches were detected before the missiles cleared the atmosphere. The Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRS, a constellation of U.S. military satellites specifically designed to detect the heat signatures of ballistic missile launches in the first seconds of ignition, registered all 24 launches simultaneously at the moment of engine ignition. Within 8 seconds, automatic alerts had reached U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii, the Combined Forces Command in Seoul, U.S. Forces Japan in Yokota, and the Aegis Destroyer Task Force operating in the Sea of Japan. The warning time that North Korea had counted on eliminating was not eliminated. It was, in fact, longer than any previous North Korean launch scenario had provided, because the solid-fuel Hwasong-18 burns at a higher temperature and produces a more visible SBIRS signature than liquid-fueled predecessors. Second mistake: the Sea of Japan was not empty. Pyongyang's intelligence picture of U.S. naval positioning in the region was 18 days out of date, the result of a deliberate U.S. operational security operation that had rerouted satellite communication and AIS transponder data to project a false picture of naval dispositions. The real picture was dramatically different. USS John Paul Jones, USS Benfold, USS Milius, and USS Barry, 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, were operating in a coordinated Aegis BMD intercept formation in the Central Sea of Japan, specifically positioned to provide ballistic missile defense coverage of the Japanese home islands. Additionally, USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser with an advanced Aegis BMD configuration, was operating 40 miles northwest of Okinawa, positioned for southern threat axis coverage. 5 ships, all of them Aegis BMD capable, all of them already tracking. Third mistake: the ground-based defenses were fully operational and pre-queued. Japan's own PAC-3 MSE Patriot batteries, 22 firing units distributed across the Japanese home islands, had been placed on heightened alert status 72 hours earlier, following intelligence assessments that indicated a possible North Korean provocation. Every battery was fully crewed, fully armed, and had already loaded targeting parameters for the threat corridors that North Korean ballistic missiles would use to approach Japanese territory. The operators were not scrambling. They were waiting, calm, hands on consoles, watching the tracks appear on their screens in real time as the SBIRS data flowed down. Fourth mistake. The THAAD batteries were not where North Korea's target planners believed them to be. One of the 2 THAAD systems assigned to Japan had been repositioned 48 hours earlier as part of a routine exercise schedule. An exercise schedule that happened to optimize its coverage geometry precisely for the threat axis that 24 Hwasong-18s would fly. This was not entirely coincidental. U.S. missile defense planners had been quietly optimizing THAAD positioning for exactly this scenario for 6 months. Fifth mistake. The U.S. Air Force was already airborne. At Kadena Air Base, one of North Korea's primary targets, the 18th Wing had been executing a surge flight operations schedule for the previous 40 hours. When the SBIRS alert arrived, there were already 22 F-15 Sea Eagles and 8 F-35As airborne in the operational area. The base that North Korea was targeting was not a static, fully loaded target full of aircraft on the ground. Half its combat power was already in the air and safe. Sixth mistake. USS Lake Erie was carrying SM-3 Block IIA interceptors. The SM-3 Block IIA, developed jointly by the United States and Japan, is the most capable ballistic missile interceptor ever deployed at sea. Its kinetic kill vehicle can reach altitudes of over 1,000 kilometers and engage ICBM-class threats in their mid-course phase. North Korea's target planners had studied Aegis BMD capability and concluded that the SM-3 Block I series could not reliably engage Hwasong-18 class missiles. They were correct about the Block I. They had not accounted for the Block IIA, whose enhanced kill vehicle, expanded divert thruster system, and improved discrimination algorithms had been specifically tested against exactly this threat class. Every SM-3 Block IIA aboard USS Lake Erie and the 4 destroyers in the Sea of Japan was already loaded. The fire control solutions were already computing. What happened in the next 19 minutes was not a missile attack. It was a lesson. At 6:23 a.m., all 24 Hwasong-18 missiles cleared their launchers in a staggered sequence designed to achieve simultaneous time on target across the 4 Japanese bases. The KPA generals had studied American missile defense architecture and concluded that a tight launch window of 90 seconds, all 24 missiles in the air within 90 seconds, would overwhelm the intercept capacity of any realistic defensive posture. Their terminal phase analysts had calculated intercept timelines and determined that the SM-3 ships would be able to achieve, at most, 16 engagements before the missiles reached terminal altitude and descended into the PAC-3 engagement envelope. They were wrong on every count. USS John Paul Jones engaged first. Her Aegis combat system, receiving real-time data from SBIRS, from the ground-based radar sites at Shiriki and Kadena, and from the distributed sensor network of the entire Aegis fleet, had already computed fire control solutions on 8 of the incoming missiles before they reached the top of their trajectory arcs. 5 SM-3 Block IIA interceptors left her VLS cells in a compressed salvo, their solid fuel second and third stage motors burning bright against the pale morning sky over the Sea of Japan. The Aegis system did not wait to observe the results of the first interceptors before launching subsequent rounds. It fired, assessed, fired again. A continuous, overlapping engagement sequence running entirely automatically under the supervision of the ship's Aegis weapon controllers. USS Benfold engaged the second threat sector simultaneously. 4 SM-3 Block IIA interceptors targeted the missiles inbound toward Misawa Air Base, the northernmost target. The fire control geometry from Benfold's position in the Sea of Japan gave her an excellent engagement angle against the Misawa-bound missiles at high altitude. In mid-course phase, while the missiles were still climbing toward apogee over the Korean Peninsula's eastern coastline, USS Milius and USS Barry split the Yokota-bound missile tracks between them, each ship firing 3 interceptors in sequenced salvos, designed to provide coverage with overlapping engagement corridors. The Yokota-bound missiles, flying a more southerly trajectory, presented a slightly different engagement geometry that Milius's fire control team had pre-computed. Every intercept parameter had already been loaded. The operators were executing a solution, not computing one. USS Lake Erie, positioned in the south, had the Kadena-bound missiles, 8 of them. The heaviest salvo, aimed at the most strategically valuable target. She launched 6 SM-3 Block IIA interceptors in the first sequence, targeting the lead elements of the Kadena salvo at maximum range in the upper atmosphere, using the full altitude reach of the Block IIA's expanded kill vehicle. The Lake Erie's Aegis system was simultaneously coordinating its engagements with the ground-based THAAD battery in Okinawa, which had been repositioned to provide complementary coverage. The THAAD system's own radar, the AN/TPY-2, the most powerful mobile radar in the world, was already tracking and classifying the Kadena-bound threats, feeding track data back into the integrated air picture. At an altitude of 800 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, the first SM-3 Block IIA kill vehicle separated from its booster and activated its infrared sensor. It was looking for a specific thermal signature. It found one. The Hwasong-18 re-entry vehicle, a blunt-body warhead weighing several hundred kilograms, was tumbling slightly as it arced through the upper atmosphere. The kill vehicle corrected. 3 divert pulses, a final burn, and then it struck the re-entry vehicle at a combined closing velocity of over 20,000 kilometers per hour. The kinetic impact released energy equivalent to a large explosion. The North Korean warhead ceased to exist as a coherent threat. It became a rapidly expanding cloud of debris in the upper atmosphere, fragments too small and dispersed to survive re-entry. Then another. The intercept sequence over the Sea of Japan and the Pacific proceeded with the systematic, relentless efficiency of a machine that had been designed for exactly this purpose and had been tested, upgraded, integrated, and perfected over 30 years of development. The Aegis BMD network, 5 ships, 2 THAAD batteries, 22 PAC-3 MSE batteries, the full weight of the space-based infrared system data feed, and the coordination hub of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's Missile Defense Operations Center, functioned as a single organism. Every track was assigned. Every interceptor was launched with overlapping coverage. Every gap was filled. 19 minutes after the first Hwasong-18 ignited its solid fuel motor in the mountains of Chagang province, the last piece of North Korean debris fell harmlessly into the Pacific Ocean east of Japan. 24 missiles launched. 24 missiles destroyed. Not 23. Not 22. 24. 0 reached Japanese territory. 0 impacted. 0 detonated. The PAC-3 MSE batteries, the last layer of the defense, were never called upon to fire because the upper-tier intercepts were complete and total. At every targeted base, the all-clear sirens began to sound. At Kadena, the F-15S and F-35AS that had been airborne when the attack came began recovery operations on a runway that was entirely undamaged, fully operational, and cleared for immediate flight operations. At Yokota, Misawa, and Sasebo, personnel emerged from hardened shelters to find their facilities intact. Not a single runway cratered. Not a single fuel depot hit. Not a single hangar touched. Now the United States answered. The answer did not wait for daylight. It did not wait for diplomatic consultations. It did not wait for anything except the execution of a strike plan that had existed in finalized form since North Korea's missile program reached ICBM-class capability. A plan that had been updated, refined, and pre-authorized for exactly this trigger. At 6:44 a.m., 21 minutes after North Korea's first launch, the first U.S. strike assets were already inbound to the Korean peninsula. Two B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, which had been orbiting in an alert holding pattern over the Pacific, a posture that STRATCOM had established as a continuous deterrence measure and which North Korea's intelligence services had never detected, crossed into Korean airspace at high altitude and zero radar cross-section. Each B-2 carried 16 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs specifically designed to reach hardened underground facilities buried under hundreds of meters of rock and reinforced concrete. The facilities that North Korean missile engineers had carved into the mountains of Chagang province over 20 years, believing them impenetrable. The GBU-57 was designed for exactly those facilities. The B-2 was designed to deliver it without being detected. The Chagang Province Missile Launch Complex, 6 tunnels, 3 hardened maintenance facilities, 2 command centers, 4 fuel storage sites, received 14 GBU-57 direct hits over a period of 8 minutes. The mountain absorbed the blasts. Then the mountain shifted. Secondary explosions stored solid fuel, warhead components, vehicle fuel, cooked off inside the tunnels for 43 minutes after the bombs impacted. When satellite imagery assessed the site 6 hours later, the underground complex had suffered structural collapse across an estimated 80% of its internal volume. From USS John Paul Jones, USS Benfold, USS Milius, and USS Barry, Tomahawk land attack missiles began launching at 6:47 a.m. 48 Tomahawks targeted the KPA Strategic Rocket Forces Command infrastructure, the hardened headquarters complex at Sangnam-dong, the radar facilities at Kalma, the mobile missile transporter erector launcher maintenance depots at 3 separate facilities in South Pyongyang province. The Tomahawks flew their pre-programmed routes at low altitude, navigating terrain, arriving at their targets with GPS precision, and detonating with 1,100-pound warheads. 4 Virginia-class submarines that had been operating in the Yellow Sea and the Sea of Japan added their own Tomahawk salvos. USS North Dakota, USS Illinois, USS Washington, and USS Indiana each contributed 12 Tomahawks, bringing the total submarine contribution to 48 additional rounds. 96 Tomahawks in total from the combined surface and submarine force, all targeted against missile infrastructure, command nodes, and supporting logistics facilities. All of them in the air within 22 minutes of North Korea's first missile launch. At 6:51 a.m. F-35A, stealth fighters from the 35th Fighter Wing at Misawa, the base North Korea had tried to destroy, launched on strike missions against North Korean coastal radar sites and forward air defense facilities. The same aircraft that North Korea had tried to eliminate from the air order of battle were now hitting back. The irony was not lost on anyone who understood what had just happened. At 7:09 a.m., the first wave of Tomahawks began impacting their targets across North Korea. 11 separate facilities struck within a 6-minute window. 3 command centers destroyed, 2 radar facilities eliminated, 4 TEL maintenance depots hit with enough precision to destroy the workshop buildings, the stored vehicles, and the adjacent fuel points simultaneously. The KPA Strategic Rocket Forces, the arm of the North Korean military that had just attempted the largest ballistic missile attack in history, lost 41% of its fixed supporting infrastructure in a single morning. The full toll, compiled by U.S. Indo-Pacific Command by noon on the same day, 24 Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missiles destroyed in flight, 0 impacts on Japanese territory, 0 U.S. or Japanese military personnel killed or wounded, 0 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 0 runways damaged. 1 underground missile complex in Chagang province structurally collapsed. 3 KPA strategic rocket forces command facilities destroyed. 11 supporting infrastructure targets mission killed. 2 North Korean coastal radar sites eliminated. 14 mobile TEL maintenance vehicles destroyed in covered facilities. Estimated KPA personnel killed in the counterstrikes. 109. In Pyongyang, the leadership that had approved Plan Cholima watched its results on a status board that told them everything they needed to know. 24 missiles, 24 intercepts, every target base in Japan operational, and now their own infrastructure burning and collapsing from Tomahawk and GBU-57 strikes that had arrived within 20 minutes of their own attack. Strikes that felt less like a response and more like a trap that had been waiting, fully armed and pre-positioned, for exactly the moment Pyongyang chose to pull the trigger, because it was. The B-2s had been airborne before the first Hwasong-18 launched. The Tomahawks had been pre-programmed and ready in their tubes. The Aegis ships had been positioned and pre-queued. The THAAD systems had been repositioned to optimize their coverage geometry. The F-35As at Misawa had been surged to keep aircraft airborne and safe from ground attack. The entire defensive and offensive architecture had been assembled, positioned, and readied, not in response to the attack, but in anticipation of it. American intelligence had not known the exact date, but American planners had known the general shape of the threat for years, and they had built an answer to it that was comprehensive, layered, and already waiting in place. The lesson was not simply that North Korea's missiles had failed. Any missile can fail. The lesson was that North Korea's missiles had encountered a defensive system so thorough, so redundant, so technically superior, that 24 simultaneous ballistic missile attacks, the most ambitious and dangerous salvo the regime had ever attempted, had not scratched a single runway on a single base. And the cost of attempting it had been the destruction of a significant fraction of the military capability that made the attempt possible. The sun rose over Japan at its appointed hour. At Kadena, aircraft were taking off. At Misawa, crews were doing post-flight inspections. At Yokota, the morning watch was changing with the same practiced routine as every other morning. At Sasebo, warships rode quietly at their moorings in a harbor that was entirely undisturbed. The Sea of Japan turned from dark steel to pale blue as the day progressed. Somewhere beneath it, the submarines that had fired their Tomahawks were already reloading. The Aegis ships that had fired their SM-3 interceptors were already replenishing their VLS cells from the ammunition ships that moved quietly in their wake. The B-2s were already back at their base, refueled, rearmed, and back on alert status. This is what happens when you fire ballistic missiles at American allies. You do not find unprepared targets. You find the full weight of the most sophisticated integrated missile defense architecture ever assembled. Satellites, destroyers, cruisers, THAAD batteries, Patriot batteries, all of them networked, all of them pre-queued, all of them already solving the intercept problem before your missiles even reach the top of their arcs. You find B-2 bombers that were already in the air before you launched. You find Tomahawks that were already loaded and targeted before you gave the order. You find a machine that has been thinking about your attack, planning for your attack, and preparing its answer to your attack for longer than you have been planning the attack itself. 24 missiles, 24 kills, 0 impacts, and one morning that North Korea's generals will remember as the day they learned, at catastrophic cost, that the shield they believed they could shatter was not a shield at all. It was a trap, and they walked straight into it.